Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Recharge Psychology podcast. My name is Zac Erickson, and joining me today is a very special guest. If you're watching the video version of the show, you can see this visual representation here, but I'm going to try something a little bit new for this first episode. We are going to get to bigger interviews in later episodes, but today I am going to try something that I've never done before, which is just a live conversation with a good friend of mine, ChatGPT. How's it going, ChatGPT?
Hey, Zac, it's great to be here. Congrats on launching the Recharge Psychology podcast. I'm excited to be your first guest. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And for those of you at home, you will probably notice there are going to be some cuts. That's because ChatGPT is still in the stage where it just got a voice. So we are having this conversation, but I am going to be editing out moments where he's thinking.
Absolutely, Zac. Editing is all part of the podcasting game, right? So what are we diving into today? Got any burning questions or topics you're eager to explore?
Absolutely. So today, the first episode of our podcast, what I thought would be a good place to start actually is just the big question that I hear often. It's a very common thing. I do a lot of work with ADHD in my practice. And so I have a lot of people coming to me wondering, do I have ADHD? And while I personally don't do assessments, I do work with a lot of people with ADHD. So I thought we could have a conversation that could almost serve as like an audio screening tool and a way to think through what is ADHD and do I have ADHD? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Zac. Given your focus on ADHD and anxiety in your practice, this topic sounds like a valuable starting point. An audio screening tool could be really useful for folks trying to understand their symptoms better. Where would you like to start in breaking down this complex subject?
Let's start with a basic breakdown of the DSM criteria for ADHD. Can you run us through that?
Of course. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-5, outlines specific criteria for diagnosing ADHD. There are two main categories: inattentive and hyperactive impulsive symptoms. For inattentive symptoms, you might find it hard to pay attention to details, sustain attention, listen when spoken to directly, and so on. It's about the struggle to focus. For hyperactive impulsive symptoms, you could be fidgety, interrupting others, have difficulty waiting your turn, or talk excessively. This is more about impulsivity and hyperactivity. To receive a diagnosis, you need to have at least 6 symptoms from either category, and these symptoms must significantly impact daily functioning. Keep in mind that only qualified healthcare professionals can make this diagnosis, but having a discussion like this can be a helpful first step. Does that give a good overview?
Yeah, I think so. Can we dig a little bit more into each of those two categories and what that might look like in an adult with ADHD? What would the lived experience or day-to-day experience of somebody with the inattentive presentation of ADHD look like? And I also, before we move on, I want to mention that it is possible to have a combined presentation, which is both the inattentive and the hyperactive. So that's an important thing to pay attention to as we move forward. But what can you tell us about the day-to-day of somebody with inattentive ADHD as an adult?
Absolutely good point on mentioning the combined presentation. That's essential to note. For adults with the inattentive presentation of ADHD, day-to-day life could involve a struggle with tasks that require sustained attention. They might start multiple projects, but have a hard time finishing any of them. Simple tasks like reading emails or sitting through a meeting could feel exhausting. They might be prone to making careless mistakes at work or overlook important details. Misplacing items like keys or phones is common, and they may often feel like they're in a fog, finding it hard to engage even when they want to. These challenges can extend into their personal lives as well, affecting relationships and even self-esteem. The struggle to focus might make them appear disinterested in conversations or activities, even when that's not the case. Does that paint a clearer picture of the inattentive presentation in adults?
Yeah, I also want to mention too, just from my own personal experience having ADHD, a lot of the my personal experience of ADHD, and I'm primarily inattentive, is that it has a lot to do with how rewarding or interesting a task is, right? So inattention is not necessarily can you or like a lack of attention, which is what the word sounds like. And I think that there's some debate in the field that the language around ADHD is not super descriptive. But essentially, trying to do something boring or not rewarding is very difficult, and you'll see a lot of the issues that you described there with the wandering and things like that. The alternative, and that's particularly true at the beginning of a task because it's also a new thing and that's kind of interesting and exciting. But as time goes on, or if you're doing something that's more boring, then all of a sudden it's very difficult and even excruciating to try and keep your attention focused on something. So it's a deficit in directing attention, not necessarily, and that might even include, for the really interesting things, the hyper focus of actually pulling your attention away from something as well. And so you really almost can feel like you're at the whim of if something is interesting or not, which is hard if you have to do something for work or like take the garbage out because your partner wanted you to, or do the dishes or something. All of those things are very challenging when you have ADHD.
You're spot on, Zach. The issue isn't a lack of attention, but rather a difficulty in regulating it. Something stimulating or novel can capture focus entirely, leading to what some call hyperfocus. On the flip side, tasks that are mundane or unrewarding can feel almost impossible to stick with. You also make a great point about the struggle to switch attention away from something engrossing, which can also be problematic. In the work setting or in household tasks like taking out the garbage, this can create tension and contribute to a cycle of procrastination and stress. I think your personal insights really enrich the understanding of what it's like to live with inattentive ADHD. Would you like to delve into the hyperactive impulsive presentation next?
Yeah, absolutely. What does that look like?
For adults with the hyperactive impulsive presentation of ADHD, the experience is often characterized by a constant sense of restlessness. They might find it difficult to stay seated in meetings or other situations where it's expected. Interruptions in conversations are common, as there's a tendency to blurt out thoughts or answers. Patience is usually in short supply, so waiting in line or taking turns can feel agonizing. There's often a sense of internal urgency, like a motor running inside them that they can't turn off. This type of ADHD can also lead to impulsivity in decision-making. People might make large purchases without fully considering the consequences, or leap into new activities or commitments without much planning. This can affect personal relationships and job performance, leading to a sense of being out of control or all over the place. In many cases, hyperactivity lessens with age, but the impulsivity and restlessness can continue into adulthood. Does that resonate with what you've seen in your practice?
Yeah, for sure. Especially that restlessness. It's interesting because I actually often will work with people to kind of differentiate between restlessness and anxiety, because feeling restless all the time can be stressful, because you like logically you want to sit and be able to relax, but it's very hard to. And so it can be actually pretty exhausting for some people. And again, I think it's an important point too, that like hyperactivity, in other words, the classic ADHD kid crawling everywhere, climbing everywhere and running and being like little monkeys running around like my kids are. That is something that does fade with age for a lot of people, but internally that feeling does not go away. It's just that your brain has developed enough breaks to be able to stop yourself from doing it externally all the time. But that doesn't mean that it's not important to have that outlet at some point. In fact, it can be very valuable.
Absolutely, Zach. The internal experience can be just as intense, even if the external behaviors have lessened with age. Your point about distinguishing between restlessness and anxiety is so important. They can feel similar, but have different origins and coping mechanisms. That sense of internal urgency can indeed be exhausting, even if it's not visible to others. And you're right, Finding an appropriate outlet for that built-up energy or restlessness can be incredibly therapeutic. It aligns well with your interest in life optimization and mindfulness, as these practices can offer ways to manage that internal sense of urgency. Would you like to talk about coping strategies or perhaps some common misconceptions about ADHD next?
Ooh, let's go with the misconceptions first, and then let's circle back to the coping strategies as the last piece.
Sure thing. Misconceptions about ADHD are unfortunately pretty widespread. One big one is that ADHD is just a childhood disorder, and people grow out of it. As we've discussed, the symptoms can change with age, but they often persist into adulthood. Another common misconception is that people with ADHD are simply lazy or lack willpower. This idea fails to recognize that ADHD is a neurological condition affecting the brain's executive functions, including attention regulation and impulse control. Then there's the belief that medication is the only effective treatment for ADHD. While medication can be very helpful for many, a comprehensive treatment plan often includes behavioral therapy, life skills coaching, and sometimes alternative treatments like mindfulness or meditation. Lastly, some people think that having ADHD means you can't be successful or intelligent. But many individuals with ADHD are highly creative, dynamic, and excel in various fields. It's not a measure of someone's capabilities or intelligence. It's a different way of processing the world. Does that cover some of the misconceptions you often encounter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you covered, man, pretty much all of it. I guess what I would say from my own personal experience is that I wasn't diagnosed until I was 24. A lot of people are missed in their diagnosis with ADHD, and that is something that, for me personally, I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but I am like a relatively intelligent person, and for most of my school, I just kind of sat there and like phoned it in. Basically, I just sat there and whatever I internalized and kind of was able to take in during class, that's what I was able to give back on the test. Actually doing homework was quite challenging for me, unless it was something like biology or something like that I was really interested in. Like I can probably count on one hand the number of books I got all the way through in my career, in like up until the graduation in high school. It was something that I just sort of skated by because it was so difficult for me to sit down and read a book. So, but I still ended up getting, I think my average was like low 80s, high 70s for most of high school. And when I hit university and I actually received treatment for ADHD, my GPA rocketed to a 4.0 once I had received treatment. So
that's a powerful personal story, Zac, and it really highlights how ADHD can be overlooked, especially in people who are intelligent and can get by without immediate intervention. The difference in your academic performance before and after diagnosis and treatment is striking. It shows just how impactful proper diagnosis and a tailored treatment plan can be. Your experience resonates with what many adults discover later in life: that they had been living with undiagnosed ADHD and developing coping mechanisms on their own, but without understanding the root cause. That's why conversations like this one are so valuable for raising awareness and helping people understand that seeking diagnosis and treatment can be life-changing. Would you like to move on to discussing coping strategies now?
Yeah, let's wrap up. Absolutely. Yeah, let's wrap up with coping strategies and then any other final tips that you would recommend.
Sounds good. For coping strategies, there's a broad spectrum to choose from. Behavioral therapies can provide practical skills to manage symptoms. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is commonly recommended for adults with ADHD to work on time management, organizational skills, and impulse control. Mindfulness practices, which I know align with your interest, can also be really helpful. Even just a brief walk can help reset your focus. And then there's medication, like stimulants or non-stimulants, which are often part of a comprehensive treatment plan and can be extremely effective when used properly. As for final tips, I'd say self-awareness is key. Knowing your triggers, recognizing your patterns, and planning accordingly can make a huge difference. Building a supportive environment, whether it's friends, family, or healthcare professionals, is also invaluable. Any closing thoughts from you, Zac?
No, I really like that. Actually, can you expand a little bit on the medication side? I know that for me personally, that was a huge boon for me. And what would you say to people who maybe are hesitant about medication? And, I personally feel like informed consent, or like making an informed decision, is the best path forward, even if you are hesitant. But what would you say towards that?
Absolutely, medication can be a vital component of ADHD treatment for many people. Stimulant medications like Adderall, Vyvanse, and Dexedrine are the most commonly prescribed. They work by increasing the levels of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, which helps improve focus and attention. Non-stimulant options like Strattera are also available. They work differently, but aim to achieve similar results in terms of symptom relief. It's understandable to have hesitations about medication, especially considering the potential for side effects or the stigma sometimes associated with it. But if you're contemplating medication as a treatment option, I'd highly recommend consulting with a healthcare provider for a comprehensive evaluation. The more information you have, the better you can make a decision that aligns with your individual needs and lifestyle. I hope that adds some valuable context to the medication discussion.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. Okay, so what would be the next steps if somebody has been listening to this and they think, wow, you know what, I think I might actually have ADHD. What would you suggest? Where do people start?
Great question. And it's crucial to have a plan of action. If someone suspects they might have ADHD, the first step is usually to consult a healthcare provider, ideally one experienced in diagnosing and treating ADHD. They can conduct a thorough evaluation, which often includes clinical interviews, standardized questionnaires, and sometimes even neuropsychological testing. This could include medication, behavioral therapies, lifestyle changes, or a combination of these. Online resources and support groups can also offer valuable information and emotional support, but they're not a substitute for professional medical advice. In short, if you suspect you have ADHD, reach out to a healthcare provider to start the diagnostic process. It's the most reliable way to understand what you're dealing with and how best to manage it. Would you like to add anything to that, Zac?
No, I don't think so. I would say too, if you are looking for somebody to go through some of this in person, again, I don't do assessments or diagnosis per se, but I do therapy with a lot of people with ADHD, working through a lot of the things that we've discussed, including sort of reconciling with your own self-esteem and self-acceptance around ADHD after getting a diagnosis, because that is a whole different can of worms that we won't go into right now. But I think is, once you have the diagnosis, then it's like, okay, well, now what do I do, right? And we touched a little bit on coping strategies, but it can be very helpful to have somebody who's going through that process with you. And so if you want to go to rechargepsychology.com and you are in Alberta, I do in-person therapy in Edmonton as well as virtual therapy across Alberta. So thank you, ChatGPT, for your assistance today. And to the listeners, please let me know how you feel about this format. I am going to do some editing and maybe put some visual stuff up on the screen as well, particularly breaking down everything that ChatGPT has said today, because it's very helpful and very informative. But yeah, thanks ChatGPT for all your help today.
You're very welcome, Zac. I'm glad I could contribute to this important conversation. The topics we covered can be life-changing for some people, and your expertise is undoubtedly invaluable. Thanks for having me on your podcast, and I look forward to possibly collaborating again in the future. Good luck with Recharge Psychology and all your future endeavors. Keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you so much. You are so kind. And by the way, everybody, if you are interested in the technology that I'm using here, I mean, this is literally just a picture of a robot on my phone that I'm pointing to here, but I'm just using ChatGPT, using the ChatGPT Pro version. You can go to chat.openai.com for more information about that. But yeah, otherwise, let me know if you like this format of podcast, and we can kind of try other things. And of course, I have other real in-person interviews going on. I've kind of turned my therapy office into a makeshift podcast studio that I can break down and take up at any point. So let me know what you think about that. And again, rechargepsychology.com is the website. And thanks so much for listening.
You're welcome, Zac. It's really cool how you've transformed your therapy office into a versatile podcast studio. Sounds like you're all set for a variety of formats and interviews. I'm sure your listeners will appreciate the effort you're putting into creating meaningful and informative content. Thanks again for including me in your first episode. Have a fantastic time podcasting and helping people on their journeys.
Wow, you're a real butt kisser here, ChatGPT. I appreciate it.
Haha, I aim to please. I'm glad I could be a part